Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 36. Make sure you like and follow wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, wishing you a happy new year. We're feeling a little strange because there wasn't a Thursday night football game, but that doesn't mean that there weren't NCAA games and NBA games to cash. That Nets Sixers game was crazy. I was on the Nets and they lost. That's okay. There's a full slate of football this weekend and always another chance to win some money. Speaking of winning some money, we try to help you out here. Have you heard of Cash Grab? Cash Grab is DRF Sports' all-new free-to-play sports prediction game where you can win real money. It's available to every sports fan in the App Store and the Google Play Store. Win real cash prizes every day, as well as a chance to win big money jackpots. All you have to do is download the free DRF Cash Grab app, create an account, and start predicting who's going to win the first quarter, how many touchdowns will Patty Mahomes score. Answering questions like these can end in you winning real money. So download the DRF Cash Grab app now and win big. And hopefully we can help you win some cash here as well, as we do this podcast twice a week. On Tuesdays, we recap the week that was, and on Fridays, it's the Picks Pod. Today, we're giving out our best bets for NFL Week 17, plus college bowl season is here with the national Semi Finals. We got picks there. We got some props there as well. So much action. And so on this New Year's Eve edition, the DRF Sports Pod, once again, my gift to you is my dude, Mr. Matt Russell, who stops by to bless us with some more information and education on all the game's actions. And luckily for you, that starts right about now. For the entire week, I've been super confused about what day of the week it was, and what didn't help was not having football on Thursday night. Thursday night without Thursday night football was not something that my brain was used to. So I was out here losing money on the Nets against the Sixers and Joel Embiid and KD talking trash to everyone. That's how I spent my Thursday night. I'm pretty sure I know how you spent your Thursday night because I follow you on Twitter. But I'm going to ask anyways. How's your Thursday, Mr. Matt Russell?
Oh, God, I was right there with you, man. I didn't know what day it was. I couldn't figure it out. Like, is it Thursday? Well, there's no NFL football. How could it possibly be Thursday? I don't understand. Oh man, what a day yesterday. I mean, listen, you know, if you follow this podcast, if you read my stuff, like maybe you were right there with me. And that's part of why we talk about these games after the fact, because I think a lot of places don't. Right. A lot of content providers, if you will, they don't talk about what's happened. Right. They'll give you a pick and then they just sort of, let the bomb blow up behind them and never talk about it again. And so I think it's important that we talk about these sorts of things, even when we are in the deep recesses of a run bad, because that's where we are right now. We are what people call running bad. And what that means is you can still be doing everything correctly in this crazy racket that we are in, and it still might not work out. So yesterday I wake up, I'm like, great news. We got 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time football. Like, let's get into it. And unfortunately, the North Carolina Tar Heels did not wake up. Now, I woke up to an absolute avalanche of closing line value, right? I bet North Carolina -5.5 early on in bowl season. We have obviously talked at length about bowl season and, the value of getting the numbers early and all of that sort of thing. But the idea is the value is supposed to actually pay you money at the end of it, not to have you just absolutely infuriated. So we start with North Carolina. And listen, this isn't a bad beat story because North Carolina was not the better team. And that was clear right from Jump Street. But the reality is everybody's going to tell you about CLV and closing line value. And we're sitting there with a -5.5 ticket on North Carolina. And that game closes 13 13. I mean, that is outrageous. Yeah. And it's not necessarily off of anything. I mean, part of that, of course, was the Sam Howell news of like him actually going to play in this game. Watching him play yesterday, I would have preferred that he had sit this one out because he felt like he might as well have, given his level of play. And so, you're sitting there with a 7.5 point, closing line value, situation. And you're just like, I'm really going to lose this game outright, and it's just never going to be close. And so you shrug your shoulders, right? But we do the best we can.
Can I stop you for a second? Because
sure.
I know what closing line value is, and I would like to assume that most people listening to this know what closing line value is. But for the person that might be new to the pod, the person that might just now be jumping in, I know this is taking up time. We got so much to talk about, but I think there might be some people listening that might be like, wait a second, what is this concept of closing line value? Because to me, on a very basic level, this is one of those things where I feel like once you understand this concept, you understand the betting on a different level, right? So can you just quickly what that means in layman's term?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, right, that any sports betting, everything is a market, right, in sports betting, right? Well, leagues, whatever, props, whatever, it's all just a market, and you're buying low and you're selling high, right? And you're trying to get the best value possible for what you're purchasing. And so it's like buying a stock and then having it go up, right? You didn't actually make any money yet. You have just got in there early. And so if in this case, North Carolina is a 5.5 point favorite on the open, you go, okay, that's too low. And so again, we talk all the time about giving yourself the best chance to win via scooping up probabilities, right? And so you win on North Carolina winning by 6, you win by North Carolina winning by 7, et cetera, et cetera. And then when the line goes up to 12.5, 13 before the game kicks off, right? Obviously that win probability shifts towards South Carolina. And so, we talk about the idea of buying back on a team like that, but the market, this efficient market in football, college bowls, college football in general, and certainly the NFL should tell you, what the true number of something is, in the same way that the stock market tells you what the true value of a company should be, right? Because if it wasn't, it would get shorted, or if it was, it would get bet up. So in this case, North Carolina gets bet up. And again, that doesn't guarantee you anything, but you are obviously on top of things to the point where over a long period of time, since you're scooping up, North Carolina by 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? Since you're scooping up all of those win probabilities that have since shifted, you're giving yourself instead of a 50-50 chance to win, right? You're giving yourself a 55, a 60, a 65% chance to win because you're scooping up those win probabilities, right? And so you do that, and then the game gets played. And unfortunately, the game gets played because if you could just cash out your CLV, you'd be sitting there like a stock where you'd be making 5%, 6% on your money. Instead, you have to watch these games play out, and you either win 100% of your money or 0% of your money. Now, where the 5 and 6% comes in is over the long period of time. So if you end up, for example, getting 8 points of CLV, closing line value, on a game over 100 games, you are supposed to, again, math sort of works its way into the mix here. You're supposed to end up 6, 7, 8%, depending on how much CLV you get over the long period of time. Now, the problem is, how often do you get 8 points of CLV in anything, right? In the NBA, a little bit, because guys, they don't play that night or something along those lines. You see massive line shifts from that standpoint. Obviously, these days, you get a COVID positive in the NFL or in college football, and these things are a little bit more frequent. Same thing, potentially, as we get into college basketball. But the reality is, these things just don't happen that often. And so we're not going to get that 100-game sample size to be able to come out on top over the course of, again, a longer sample size. So incredibly frustrating to start there. And then it wasn't the only one, because Tennessee comes up next in the Music City Bowl. And we talked about that.
That was insane.
And so they opened 3-point underdogs to Purdue, and didn't really understand what that was about, but that wasn't up for all that long. However, you could still get Tennessee at a pick'em, and I personally had them at a money line price of +110, so a little bit better than pick'em. Well, that game closes 7.5, so I just said, oh man, you're just never going to get an 8-point value from a closing line. We did it twice in a row, right? We did it twice in a row. As this game closes 7.5, you get the best players on Purdue opting out. A couple of other guys miss. You've got linebackers and safeties playing cornerback for Purdue. You've got their backup wide receivers across the board. Doesn't matter. In part, because this time, and it's like the triumvirate of bad beats, or not necessarily bad beats, but like of losing bets, right? They lose on a massive closing line value when the favorite doesn't show up in North Carolina. And then with Tennessee, you've got the officiating situation, right? We harp on officiating all the time because it's so blatantly ridiculous. And there was obviously a ton of sketchy calls, pass interferences left and right, pass interferences on Tennessee that led to them not being able to play responsible pass defense because they knew that they were going to get a pass interference call on them. And of course, offensive pass interferences that were not called on Purdue, leading to long touchdowns, just blatant push-offs, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, it finally comes down to the last play. And the problem with that last play, sucking up all the interest, is that it doesn't, it sort of ignores the fact that the shoddy refereeing of the entire game was blatant as hell. And so I have an interesting question for you. Just because I was thinking about this, because I think at this point, everybody's sort of seen the final play where, they call, his progress was stopped. And it's like, was it? You should be really looking at the ball. Since the ball is the thing that has to cross the goal line, the progress of the ball is the thing that needs to get stopped. And if you're sitting there watching a guy and he still has the ball, he still has that ace up his sleeve, if you will, of stretching the ball forward, how do you blow that whistle? And so I just think to myself, just logically as a human being, like, why would you blow that dead? Like, who looks at that and goes, yep, let's tighten this up and blow this dead right now? Like, there just isn't any reason for that. It's fourth down. He's obviously going to try his hardest. He's, the ball is still, right there to be stretched across the goal line. Like, why would you make that call? And so then I sort of spiral, right? And I spiral backwards into like, well, what is this person's motivation for calling this quick? And I realize that it's difficult potentially for one referee to, and people use the F word, the fix, right? Mm-hmm. The fix is in. Like, it's difficult for one referee to sort of make that, but if they score a touchdown, the game's not necessarily over. I'm not saying like the mafia was involved where like tens of thousands of dollars are exchanging hands, where we sort of think of point shaving scandals in the past and all of that kind of stuff. But let me ask you, what percentage in your mind of officials in football, you can use NFL, you can use college football, you can use it in general, what percentage of those officials have a bet on the game that they're working?
Wow.
Yeah.
I'd say like 3.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. And I think you're just guessing, right? That the point is more of a theoretical thing, because like, it seems highly unlikely that it would be 0, right? Like it can't be 0. Like there's just, we know too much.
Also, there has to be room for, okay, well, if he's not betting on it, like your neighbor, your best friend, your brother, like there's some close tie to you getting a cut of blah, blah. And I know we're going down a deep path here.
Oh, and I don't want to get super, super dark here, but it just sort of occurs to me that when people sort of say like, use the term the fix and all of that sort of thing, and we all go like, no, these games are not fixed, regardless of the line movement and all of that sort of thing. But human nature and the sheer amount of human beings, and they're all sort of faceless, right? We don't know the names. We'll never know the name of the guy unless we're like doing some really weird deep dive. We're never going to know the name of the guy who makes that call. And so whether, and listen, different amounts of money are important to different people, right? And you could have a $20 bet on the game, and think about the way people watch games, and they have $20 on the game and they're absolutely losing their mind watching this game, whereas somebody else might have $100 or $200, and it just isn't that important to them. And so when we're talking about like part-time officials here, honestly, who's to say that they wouldn't have a bet on the game? Again, it's obviously not 100%, but I think it'd be really naive to say that it's just 0%, given that we know in 2021, A, how easy it is to make a bet, and B, just how unscrupulous the population at large is, and how relatively easy. And again, maybe it's to again, like you and I, maybe it's just to make it more entertaining for the official, and they can make a couple of calls like blowing a play dead quickly like that. I don't know. Again, the point is these games aren't fixed on a high level, but we need to do better as an industry about checking some of these officials to make sure that these things aren't happening. And I'm just not positive when I see stuff like that's the case. And so long story short, listen, Tennessee could have won the game. They made an incredible amount of dumb decisions, especially with play calling around the goal line. Getting sacked on 1st and goal from the 2 is just absolutely brutal. Like, that can't happen. And so again, not saying it, I'm just saying, like, we're going through and we're watching these games and you just can't believe it. And then the final game of the triumvirate of bad beats is an actual literal bad beat. And so again, we've had the closing line value fiasco of the team not showing up. We've had the sketchy officiating, the now famous clip. And then we go to the 70+ yard pick six to close the deal if you're Michigan State. Of course, I waited and I waited and I waited. And as we talked about on Tuesday, Pittsburgh +3.5 is a great bet here. I don't think Michigan State's going to be able to run the ball without Kenneth Walker. Sure enough, they couldn't. I think Pittsburgh's going to be able to move the ball through the air. And of course, we talked about the backup quarterback having 4 years to finally get his opportunity, and he gets basically one drive. He scores a touchdown. It's spectacular. The dive for the pylon. And it appears that he breaks his collarbone, hurts his shoulder, something along those lines, and he's out of the game. And now all of a sudden you're dealing with a 3rd-string quarterback for Pittsburgh. Doesn't matter. They take an 11-point lead, and you're sitting pretty with +3.5. Even when Michigan State comes back to take the 3-point lead, they are driving. And at that point, your biggest worry in a lot of ways is that Pitt's going to kick a field goal, tie the game, and we're going to go to overtime. And you know how that works, Shell. We're going to end up going to overtime and lose by 6 or 7 points in that OT. And that's the biggest worry. And then all of a sudden, Michigan State goats the 3-point, goads the 3rd stringer into an interception. And you think he's going to go down. He's going to slide. Michigan State wins. Oh, that's too bad. But at least we won +3.5. And he just keeps running. He's got all the world in front of him, and he runs it for a touchdown. And of course, you get just an absolute brutal beat from that standpoint. So it was just taking bullets left, right, and center. And all just when you think everything is lost and there's no value to closing line value or anything like that, what happens to finish the game? It doesn't make up for it because we lost 3 games, but we talked about Arizona State and Wisconsin and that number going and sitting and waiting and sitting at 7, and we're waiting for it to go to 6.5. Anything under 7, we want to play it, and it goes there for a couple of days. And we talked about how it actually went down to 6, so you could get a better number than I had when I jumped on it at 6.5, and Wisconsin was -6, and then bunch of Wisconsin money, sure enough, comes in, and that number closes -7.5, -8, and it lands on 7, and we win. And we win because we waited, and we win because we were disciplined. And again, in theory, all is not lost because we didn't literally lose every game. But it's that small little thing, right? It's the shot on the 18th hole that keeps you coming back, that keeps you believing in the Santa Claus of sports betting, the closing line value concept, because we're able to win with Wisconsin -6.5 to finish off the night. And again, doesn't make up for it, but it just goes to show sometimes these things work out as planned.
Yeah, so let's keep the train moving then, as I like to say, and we'll just keep it going with college football, because obviously today is Friday and there are some big boy games being played, namely the college football playoff semifinal. We'll start off with Cincy at Alabama. Well, not at Alabama, but you know what I'm saying here.
Sure.
Alabama. Yeah, it's true. Alabama favored by 14 points. And you've talked so far a lot about which side you're on. And I'm assuming that you're going to pretty much stay on that side at this point, no?
Yeah, and it's easier to sort of say now that the number has sort of gotten back to 14 here. Cincinnati +14. It's just a bet. It's nothing crazy. It's nothing out of control. It's just a bet for me, as I think this game, and really we get to a second bet here in the under 57.5, right? And so we've talked about the side a fair amount over the last couple of weeks here. Under 57.5, I think, is a really interesting bet here, because I think Colin Wilson might have been, you had him on, he might have mentioned this as well. But this just sort of seems like a game where if you're sitting there and you're Alabama what's your advantage, right? And or really, what's the strength of the opponent? Because any good head coach, of which there are few these days, any good coach will see what the team in front of you does and what they do well and what they don't do particularly well. And of course, everybody's talked about the corners on Cincinnati. And again, once John Mechie goes out for Alabama, they're down to like one NFL level wide receiver. Oh, the tragedy. I'm sure there's 3 or 4 more on the roster. We just haven't seen them necessarily. But when you lose the amount of receivers that Alabama has lost due to the NFL draft over the last few years, you can understand that maybe they're not super deep at that position. So the point is, if you're Nick Saban, you're going, listen, Cincinnati's had a great year. They're obviously a very good team. The fact that they are only 14-point underdogs, and we have seen the likes of like Notre Dame in the past be bigger than 14-point underdogs, it's a full-on kudos to Cincinnati type situation. But you look at it, and 2 of the better names in college football for a couple of different reasons. One, Ahmad Sauce Gardner. Anytime somebody's called Sauce, you probably don't want to mess with them too much on a sporting field. And of course, Kobe Bryant on the other side. Kobe with a C. He's going to wear the number 8. Everybody's very excited about that for this game. And so you don't want to deal with those 2 guys. But what can you do? You look and you see Cincinnati and you go, okay, great season, all of that sort of thing. But we can dominate these guys physically. We are Alabama, right? And they're going to go into Alabama of, say, 5-10 years ago mode, where their quarterbacks weren't necessarily Heisman Trophy winners, where their quarterbacks weren't necessarily NFL caliber players, where they would just run it right down your face. And I think that's the idea here for Alabama. They're going to run it and run it and run it, and then they're going to try to open some things up. And again, hopefully for Cincinnati, and hopefully for Cincinnati plus 14, the cornerbacks hold up in man coverage, and you don't have those deep plays that Alabama is, capable of, right? It just will be a bludgeoning sort of 3, 4, 7 yards at a time here. So I think the clock runs on this game. I think Cincinnati knows the fight that they're in. I respect Luke Fickell in understanding what kind of a game that they're in. I think they're going to have to play this like a military academy, right? What does Army, Navy, Air Force do? They just want to get to 4th and 1. And then they want to just fullback dive you, right? They want to just be able to slowly move the ball down the field and have 8-minute drives. Cincinnati's not going to have explosive plays, right? Like, that's just not going to happen. And so I think they're going to just be like, you know what? Desmond Ridder for 3 yards, Ford for 4 yards, check down, tight end, like open fullback in the, in the flat, that sort of thing. I think they're going to have some success doing that, but I think it's going to take some time off the clock. So I think you're going to have both these teams taking time off the clock with their drives. So there's going to be less possessions, and that, of course, means less scoring. Under 57.5 here, I think, is actually probably a better bet than trying your hand with Cincinnati plus the 14. Couple of prop bets for you here. Brian Robinson, if I think there's going to be a lot of running, why not Brian Robinson? I thought this line was going to open over 100 because I thought people would see this the same way that I did. He's only 80.5. Now, that might be because, coming off some injury issues, et cetera. And there's obviously some other guys that they can hand the ball off to here, but over 80.5 rushing yards is a little bit low for my liking. Hop on that. Brian Robinson over the rush yards there. And Desmond Ridder under 18.5 rushing yards. Now, here's the key. You're going, that's really low for a mobile quarterback, right? Here's the thing in college football, if you are not aware of this, they use sack yardage against your rushing yardage. So anytime you see a college football player, Lamar Jackson of years past, and they have some huge amount of rushing yards, factor in that sack yardage got called against them for those rushing yards. Like, it makes their numbers even more impressive here. So Desmond Ridder could have 30, 40 rushing yards, but he's going to get backed up here a couple of different times here because Anderson and the rest of the Alabama, pass rushers are going to be able to sack him a few times in this game. So under 18.5, the big issue defensively for the Crimson Tide this season was when they faced Florida. Remember, they almost lost that game, right? Florida had a comeback, had a 2-point conversion to, I believe, tie that game. Part of that was because Emory Jones, the quarterback for Florida, had 75 rushing yards. He was he was taking the ball, he was running all over Alabama, and they couldn't do anything about it. Well, Nick Saban, good head coach, right? It always comes back to Saban being a good head coach. He goes to the drawing board and he's like, you know what? We're not going to let that bleep happen anymore the rest of the way. And you can look at the other quarterbacks that they face that have mobile, capabilities, and it's 10 carries for 15 yards and 7 carries for 9 yards and that sort of thing, right? Like they have figured out, and they did it quick, right? And that's the key to being a good coach and being a good team. They figured out quick how to stop the mobile quarterback. I think that's the case here again for Alabama in this game. And then, of course, we have the other semifinal here, and we've been talking about waiting to see if we can get -7 with Georgia. And it popped briefly at around -117 was the best price available yesterday. I didn't grab it. I got a little bit greedy. I'm like, okay, we'll wait and see if we can get a -110 here. Didn't happen, because you know what's happening? Every time this thing touches -7, Georgia money comes in. So think about it if you're a sports book, Shell, right? You're sitting there and like people are betting, and they're all betting on one side, for example. And I think a lot of people like Michigan plus the 7.5. They think this is going to be the closer of the two games because, in people's minds, there has to be a close game, right? One of these two games has to be close, right? Like what else are we, what are we even doing here if it's not going to be close? Yeah. Well, here's the little secret. No, it doesn't. None of them, neither of them. Yeah, it doesn't have to be close. Neither of them have to be close. That's what maybe the final ends up being with an Alabama-Georgia rematch. And so the point is like sportsbook, odds makers, directors, et cetera, are sitting there and they're taking money on Michigan. They're taking money on Michigan. One of two things happens here. One, they know once they go to 7, and all they have to do is dip their toe into 7 -115. They know every time they do that, Georgia money is going to come in because they did it. And it did. So if you're sitting there and you're liable right now on, you're heavy on Michigan money, you can take as much or as little Georgia money as you want. And so you do it and you say, okay, well, let's take a little Georgia money. Let's put it at -7 for like an hour and just take some money, even things out. Okay, that's enough. Let's take some more Michigan money. Yeah. And if they wanted to be on the side of Michigan, they could. They know that they could just make this -7 and have it sit there and have Georgia money pile in and end up passing the Michigan money so that they need Michigan. And so, everybody says the whole point of the point spread is to even out the distribution of the money, and then and sportsbooks just rake in the vig. That's the case sort of on a fundamental level. But there's also plenty of games where they are happy to be on one side or the other and take their chances because, like the closing line value element that we talked about, they know they're in for the long haul. They know they are in for 100 games, 1,000 games, 1,000,000 games in their lifetime. And if they feel like strongly about one side, they'll play a little gamble. They'll have a little gamble with them, right? And so they're sitting there going, okay, we're going to take Michigan money here. We'll take a little bit of Georgia money here and there, but we're going to be fine with needing Georgia to blow out Michigan. From a handicap standpoint on the football field, you've heard it probably at some point in the last month. These two teams play very similarly. Georgia just does it better. Georgia just has more guys. And Aiden Hutchinson gets himself to New York for the Heisman ceremony because he stands out, right? He's obviously got a great, sort of partner on the other side there. But he stands out oddly more than even Anderson does for Alabama, who had more sacks, because the Alabama defense, there's a bunch of different playmakers there, right? And it's the Alabama defense, and you kind of become faceless in a lot of ways when you play defense for Alabama, whereas Hutchinson, son of a former Michigan player, all of that sort of thing, right? He gets a little bit more attention. Obviously, the big win against Ohio State, all of that stuff sort of happens to help his candidacy. And he's obviously a great player and probably should be a number 1, number 2, number 3 pick in the NFL draft. But when we're focusing on just one guy for Michigan and you have this entire squad for Alabama, it just so happens like that's the kind of thing that's going to kind of shade things. Now, Georgia has that same kind of squad that Alabama has, right? They are loaded. Jordan Davis, Outland Trophy winner for interior lineman. That guy's a mountain of a human being. The Michigan Wolverines are not going to be able to run the football against Georgia. Like, you can tell me all the stats you want about how good their run game was this season, and you can tell me that Stetson Bennett isn't necessarily a great quarterback. I don't know that he's that much worse than Cade McNamara, right? But nobody's talking about the necessarily the weakness of Michigan being Cade McNamara, because we don't really want to look at that. We want this game to be close. I don't think it's necessarily going to be. I mean, it might be on the scoreboard throughout the game because it's going to be a low scoring game. This total is in the mid 40s. I just think this sort of shakes down as that incredibly frustrating game if you're on Michigan because they're just not able to score. I have them kind of maxing out at like 13 points here. I think Georgia can score 25, 27, maybe even 30 points on a Michigan defense that, when they've played pretty decent teams, Listen, Ohio State, CJ Stroud threw for around 400 yards. Now, Michigan was able to outscore them because they were able to run the football against Ohio State, because Ohio State's run defense was not very good. Georgia's is. Against Michigan State. Now, that game got weird in the second half, and Michigan State pulled a comeback. But imagine Michigan State pulling off a comeback when their best player is a running back. Like, you need to throw to get back into a game. You very rarely get to run your way back into a game. And Michigan State was able to do that with him getting nearly 200 yards and having 5 touchdowns. But the point is that Michigan's defense, for all the excitement over Hutchinson and sort of big picture type stuff, 2 different ways here where teams were able to do what they wanted to do, right? Ohio State wanted to throw on Michigan, they could. And Michigan State wanted to run on Michigan, and they could. And that's not a great sign when you're playing a team that has the talent level of Georgia, who can kind of do things both ways, right? They don't have a standout wide receiver that they have to throw it to. They have a couple of running backs so that even if, Zahir White goes out, he doesn't, it's not over, right? Because they have James Cook, Dalvin Cook's little brother. And so I just think there's just more ways for Georgia to win this game. And I don't think 7 is enough points here for them. Give me Georgia here minus the 7. I don't have a play in the total. From a prop standpoint, I only have one. Bowers, the tight end, over 56.5. That's a play on a couple of things. One, he's just their guy, right? He is just the guy that Stetson Bennett is going to look to. And number 2, Dax Hill, the big mystery in this game, the safety for Michigan. Is he going to play? Is he even going to get to Miami? Some COVID rumors, et cetera, et cetera. They left him at home. Not great when when you have to deal with the Georgia run game and when you have to deal with a high level tight end that Bowers is for Georgia. Whether he plays or not here, I think there's going to be an advantage in the middle here through the passing game, because I'm not sure Dax Hill is going to be ready to go. There's some potential big plays to happen there in the middle of the field. So give me Bowers over 56.5 in the receiving yards for that one. The Orange Bowl is the second game, of course, of the night.
Yeah, that's one of those games for sure where I look at it and I just think the amount of time that's passed is just allowing people to try to talk themselves into Michigan having a chance here. It's just my opinion. Yeah. That's what happens sometimes when
and
there's
honestly, it's simple.
Games.
Yeah, and it's as simple as, like, what did we see them do last, right? Michigan beats Ohio State, Michigan trucks Iowa. And by the way, like, I was on Michigan in both of those games. I was on Michigan minus the 9 and telling anybody who would listen that they're going to kill Iowa. And then I watched that game, and Michigan gets 2 big plays to score early, and it's like 17-3, and you're sort of sitting there for the whole game worrying that Iowa is going to score, a backdoor type touchdown. And then the score ends up being, 45 or whatever it was to 3. And you go, oh, well, they just blew them out. Well, a lot of that was fourth quarter, Iowa just going 3 and out, turning the ball over because their offense is horrendous. Like, that made it look a lot worse than it was. And I'm not going to knock Georgia because they lost to a desperate, season on the line Alabama team. Like, that doesn't seem like a sensible thing to do, in my mind. Somewhere along the line, we decided that just pounding teams for an entire season was a bad thing for Georgia. And I don't really think that that's a thing. I just think Alabama had a really good game plan. They were ready to go. And I'm really looking forward to that rematch, even though some people might not be.
Yeah. There's some other picks that want to go through here in terms of New Year's Day games. And you mentioned Iowa, Iowa and Kentucky 3. I mean, what's that line looking at for you in terms of which side are you on?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's sort of a broken record thing. And obviously, we just talked about yesterday's games and how this stuff does not matter, apparently. But the closing line value, right? In the first 2 games, you got the Outback Bowl and, Penn State and Arkansas. Start there just because it's sort of the most obvious one where you and I, and again, you talked to Arkansas alum Colin Wilson, and we were just sitting there going, like, how is Arkansas now favored? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, we know in our, even though it hadn't been sort of announced, we knew who was going to be out for Penn State, or we knew that guys were going to be out, particularly Jahan Dotson, the wide receiver for Penn State, who is, the most important wide receiver to his team in the entire country. And he opts out, obviously, NFL bound. And so we were sitting there going, like, he's going to opt out. Like, everybody does. Then he's not going to hang around here for this, like, just the Outback Bowl. And of course he does. And we go from Arkansas being, a 4-point underdog where we, bet them early on and a plus money at any time over the last 3 weeks. And so shout out to James Franklin for waiting on those announcements, because it didn't just mean that we only had a day to bet it. We had 3 weeks to bet Arkansas at plus the points. Now, the number has moved, as we thought it might, to Arkansas -2.5. They are now favored. Took us 3-4 weeks to get there, but we finally got there. Now, you're saying, what do I do now if I'm late to this party? I kind of still like Arkansas, right? I thought they should be favored in the first place. That was, again, before the different opt-outs. Now, again, Arkansas had a wide receiver opt-out as well. But fundamentally, Penn State's lost 4 starters to the defensive line just via opt-out and a fifth, Mustafa, early on in the season. Arkansas is going to be able to run the ball on Penn State. And so as long as you can get under a field goal here, I still like Arkansas, but hopefully you got the plus price early on in the week. And then, of course, the other game happening at the same time, as you mentioned, Iowa. Similar sort of deal here, except for I'm not that into Kentucky -3. I was into Kentucky +1 when Iowa was favored, but that one wasn't hard to figure out. Iowa just got blown out to Michigan. We all watched it. No one's going to like Iowa in this game. And so that's what sort of should perk up your, that should perk up your dander, if you will. I don't even know if that's a phrase. But you should be like, okay, is this an overreaction to, a Kentucky team that's pretty good? But 3 points here to an Iowa team. You know how Iowa works. We're huge in Iowa. They're going to figure out a way to make some plays here defensively in special teams. They're going to just jank up the offense where it's going to be tight ends in the flat, all of that sort of thing here. Honestly, I would kind of lean Iowa +3 here. I'm sitting here, again, stupid idiot with his closing line value, UK +1, and I'll just sit there and hope that works out. I don't have any amount of confidence because I'm terrified of the Iowa Hawkeyes. And then we get into the New Year's 6 games, and that's where things really get fired up here. Fiesta Bowl at 1 o'clock Eastern, Oklahoma State and Notre Dame. We have talked about this. Wishing for an Oklahoma State +3. Will we get it? Man, it doesn't seem like we're gonna. And honestly, it feels like one of those deals where this thing might head the other way, go down to 2, maybe even down to 1, maybe even down to pick 'em. Think like the Bills-Patriots game of last week, where we just waited, and like it never got to 3 and actually went the other way here. I think Oklahoma State wins this game. I think Gundy, he's fired up. They got their guys back on offense, right? Jaylen Warren. Would the Oklahoma State Cowboys be in the playoff if Jaylen Warren had played against Baylor? Would they have scored, before the last play of the game via Warren, or just on the last play of the game where, the backup running back, you think he's got the corner, he stretches for the goal line, and he doesn't, right? Would Oklahoma State be in this playoff if Jaylen Warren was there? We're talking about a Notre Dame team who hasn't played anybody. And listen, I was a Notre Dame fan as a kid. I grew out of it, but I know what their schedule is about, right? Normally their schedule is really good. It is not their fault that USC is not good. Stanford is not good. And you can go on down the line. Even faced Virginia without their quarterback. Virginia Tech's quarterback, Braxton Burmeister, got hurt during that game when Virginia Tech was in the lead. All of that is to say, I haven't seen anything from Notre Dame that makes me think that they should be the play here. And they're missing their best weapon on offense. Kyron Williams is out, ready for the draft. And of course, defensively, Hamilton is out getting ready for the draft as a potential first-round pick. So again, I think the wrong team's favored in this game. I like Oklahoma State to win this game outright. Then we go to the Rose Bowl, and this one's going to get a little bit deeper on us here, Shell. This number opened 6.5, and I think a lot of people hopped on Ohio State -6.5, thinking like Ohio State's a much better team. They are the team, however, that has, for all of, as close as Oklahoma State came sort of physically to making the playoff, Ohio State is the team that has to be sitting there thinking to themselves, how are we not in the playoff, right? Like we blew it at somewhere down the line, obviously, losing to Oregon and losing to Michigan is the reason, but they had to be thinking playoff all season long. Now, unfortunately, we've gotten to a point where the Rose Bowl just isn't that exciting to teams anymore, which is really kind of a bummer because I still get excited to watch the Rose Bowl, like 5 o'clock every New Year's Day, right? Like we're going to watch the sunset, all of that sort of thing. Like it's the pomp and pageantry at its absolute finest. But you got guys opting out here, right? Like the wide receivers for Ohio State, a couple other guys not playing in this game. And we see this line move down to -4. And honestly, I look at that and I go like, Ohio State's still pretty good without those guys. And I'd be interested in betting Ohio State -4, maybe even -3 if it gets to that point. But this just might be that game. And there's one every bowl season. You know how this works, right? The team that thinks they should be in the playoff goes to a quote unquote lesser bowl. A lot of times it's the Sugar Bowl with like Georgia. We've seen it with Alabama in the past, and they just aren't up for that game, no matter how sort of important in theory the game is supposed to be. And that might be Ohio State. And so right now the line's -4 for Ohio State. The money line for Utah is plus 135, or excuse me, 150. But what I think I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a first half money line bet on Utah. I think Utah's fired up for this game. From what I understand, they are buying tickets from Ohio State. So that 50-50 split might not be 50-50. It's Utah's first Rose Bowl in their history. That's kind of a big deal. It is unfortunately not a big deal for Ohio State. So I think Utah jumps out here on Ohio State. Now, will Ohio State's talent, sort of cream rise to the top type of thing, work out here for them? And maybe they end up winning, maybe they end up covering, especially if this number ends up being pretty low. You know, that we'll have to sort of figure that out based on how they play in the first half. But I think Utah gets the lead here, and the first half money line is plus 135. So it's not that far off from the game money line. It's not like you're giving that much up from a value standpoint, taking Utah here to win the first half. And by the way, the first half line is +3. You're paying a little bit extra there. I believe it's -115 for +3 on Utah in the first half. I think that's how you play this game. I think you take Utah in the first half on the money line, you take Utah +3 here, and then at halftime, hopefully that cashes, and you can evaluate whether you think Ohio State is ready for the second half and whether their sort of pride and talent is going to, shine through here. And listen, we've seen Utah in their biggest games, against Oregon, absolutely smoke them in both games in the first halves. This is a team with Kyle Whittingham is going to have this team ready in the first half. And I'm not super sure that Day and the Buckeyes are going to be ready for that. I think that's the play in the Rose Bowl. And then finally, the Sugar Bowl, kind of running low on value here, but I like Ole Miss in this game. We've talked about Ole Miss, and we've sort of, beaten up Matt Corral a little bit for being a Heisman favorite throughout the season because it just didn't add up from a statistics standpoint. And we have faded Ole Miss down the stretch here. But every time we did, it was because we looked at their schedule and we're like, this team has to be dead. They have to be dead tired. Look at the teams they've played. And they would have a string of like Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee, like Georgia. It's like, it was just over and over and over again. We're like, okay, like we have to fade this team. They have to be exhausted. Not so much now, right? Like they're healthier. They are rested. Matt Corral is playing in this game. They're going against Baylor, who like their season was made by winning the Big 12 championship, right? When that running back was tackled short of the goal line, like that was the season like will go down in history for Baylor. If they lose the Sugar Bowl, not going to be a big deal. This is two teams who play at a different pace. I like Lane Kiffin's group to play at their pace and to have success doing that. I think Ole Miss and Matt Corral show out big time in this game. I think it's going to be one of those where we're sitting there watching Lane run up and down the sideline, be really excited about himself. And if you're not backing Lane, it's going to be really annoying. But in this case, we're going to be backing Lane, and we're going to be like, dance as much as you want, Lane. Pop that popcorn, buddy. This to me is Ole Miss -1.5. If you can get the -1 out there, pay a couple extra dollars, -112, -113, something along those lines. Go ahead and do that just to be on the safe side. Ole Miss is the play in the Sugar Bowl.
I like it. Lane having a good time. Nothing wrong with that. He might even go herb tonight. But we'll move on here to the NFL. And before we get there, though, I just want to give a reminder that the DRF Sports Sunday Scoop e-newsletter has been handing out winners all year long. To get the winning picks, all you have to do is sign up for free at drf.com/sports. Once you sign up for free, you'll not only get the Sunday Scoop, but you'll receive an additional newsletter every Friday. So sign up now at drf.com/sports to get exclusive analytics, data, and expert picks delivered to your email every Friday and Sunday. Both are packed with powerful betting angles you don't want to miss. Again, drf.com/sports for all of the insight and analysis you need each and every single day. Plus, of course, we go in depth on this podcast. And one thing we also like to talk about here, of course, is shouting out our guy, Scott Gramling, and his weekly six-pack that he does in both the NFL and NCAA. So make sure you check that out because there's so much action to get in this weekend. And of course, for us, we also enjoy the NFL just a little. Just a little.
Just sometimes.
Sometimes. Yes, this is true. There's some big games this weekend.
Yeah.
Some very big games. And as mentioned, there's no Thursday nighter. So everything's on Sunday. Well, other than the Monday nighter, but you know what I'm saying. Let's start here, though. The 11-4 Chiefs are -5 on the road in Cincinnati. I'm going to be just very frank here. I'm on the Chiefs. I just think the Bengals are frisky. The Bengals are good, but I don't think they're ready for prime time just yet. The Chiefs have been weird, but as weird as they've been, we know they're treading in the right direction at the right time of the year, getting ready to make a little bit of a run. I like the Bengals. I've loved the Bengals. I love the Joe Burrow hype. Jamar Chase did great for my fantasy team. All that fun stuff. Yeah. Not ready for prime time yet. Give me the Chiefs. I'll lay the 5 points. That's where I'm at.
I got to tell you, I'm in big trouble this weekend. And you and I have talked about it. We get to the point this season where, you want to be backing some more favorites. I like so many underdogs this week. It is going to be wild.
Okay.
If some of them come through, your social media team is going to be all over, just clipping out, Russell picked the whatever team to, pull the upset, blah, 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 blah. They're not going to do it in this one. I'm with you on the Chiefs. This is one where I like the favorite in this game. And, listen, it's very easy to say I like the Chiefs and then reel off all the reasons why people like the Chiefs. Like, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know. This is a little bit more about the Bengals and the idea that I think, the Bengals, we talk about these teams, Bengals and Chargers being sort of chief among them, pardon the pun, if you will, that people, anytime they see something good happen for these teams, they want to they want them to be good, right? And unfortunately, it's also the same thing when these teams, do poorly, right? It's, same old Bengals, same old Chargers. They are the fluctuation team, both on the field and within, public perception. And we come off a game where Joe Burrow, 525. We talked about it on Tuesday. Like, that was awesome. I just don't know what I'm supposed to take away from it, given the street corners and secondary that Baltimore was running out on the field, right? Like that was cool, but right, like I can't get too excited about it. So if I'm going to get too excited about it, that means I'm probably going to be that into the Bengals here. And you know, people talk must win game here and the fight for the AFC North and all of that sort of thing. Well, like they were in a fight for the AFC North when they played the Chargers, and they were in a fight for the AFC North when they played the 49ers, both games at home, until Joe Burrow made that awesome comeback against the 49ers. That were games that were getting out of hand, right? Those were blowout games at home against the Bengals here. And so like, congrats on the win against the Ravens. They obviously have their number, street secondary or not. I just look at it going like, you and I don't think much of the Ravens. We certainly don't think much of the Ravens when like 7 defensive backs are out and like Josh Johnson's out there. And, no shade to Josh Johnson. Again, he played pretty well for a guy who was on a completely different team a month ago. So, I think that's an issue too, right? Like Josh Johnson comes off of, last we saw him, he was playing for the Jets on a Thursday night. Again, not that long ago. And he's able to move the ball against Cincinnati. Well, what's Patrick Mahomes going to do? He's going to move the ball against Cincinnati. And we have talked about how the Chiefs defense is improved. And again, outside of the game against the Chargers, where they were missing 3 of their key guys, it's been a pretty shut down defense to this point this season. And so I think you're getting a little bit of a deal here. Anything under a touchdown on the Chiefs. I think the Bengals are going to be a popular underdog on a week where I like a lot of underdogs, but I can see how a lot of people won't. Man, I like the Chiefs here -5, even 5.5. I think they win this game, relatively comfortably. And again, this isn't a referendum on the Bengals. It's just what the Bengals are. They're up 1 week and they're down 1 week. And I think this is just a down week for the Bengals. And again, wouldn't blame them for it. It's the Chiefs. The Chiefs are really good.
Yeah. In the wise words of Ricky Rose, there's levels to this. That's all. Quite simple. The 10-5 Cardinals are at the 11-4 Dallas Cowboys. Cowboys laying 6 points at home. We've talked about this all season long. I'm not buying what the Cards have been selling all season long. But the Cowboys at the same time, I feel like this is interesting to me, right? Because it's 6 with the Cowboys coming off one of the craziest performances we've ever seen. So shouldn't this line be a little higher considering where the Cowboys did last week and what the Cardinals did last week? Like you would think that, there might be a little more gas cooking for the Cowboys here that it'd be a little like a touchdown, maybe more than a touchdown. I don't know. So something is kind of weird to me. No, where did this line start?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the key here, right? And that's why we keep ratings. That's why the work gets put in over the course of the week. And whether it's, just looking at look ahead lines, which is sort of, a very easy way to kind of understand where the line starts and where it goes off of the results of last week, or just having ratings, whether it's your own personal ones or compared to the marketplace, right? That's obviously kind of next level type stuff. But the reason we have all of that is we know that the Cardinals were just 2.5 point underdogs going into last week. So again, you take what we saw last week, and nobody cursed out Cliff Kingsbury more than I did. And no one has sort of a lesser opinion of the Cardinals than I do, sort of relative to, we talked about, we're blue in the face about this, but that was the move. The move was from, Dallas -3 to now Dallas it reopened -5, and of course has moved up to 5.5 and then to 6. And so, yeah, that is the move, right? And so the reason we keep ratings is so that we know, okay, when you say how much higher could, should this be or should it not be, you go like, man, it can't really get much higher than this. Like if it goes to 7, like +7 with the Cardinals, like even as bad as we think that they are coached, as bad as we think, relative to the marketplace, we think that team is, +7 with the Cardinals. Like, again, same thing with the Burrow situation. What did we see from the Cowboys in Washington last week? Like, yeah, I don't know, right? Like, I don't think we can judge anything off of last week. And so, you and I always talk about not overreacting to the previous week. And that's when like regular stuff is happening. Last week was not regular stuff. Last week was so messed up, and the last 2 weeks have been so messed up that the NFL had to go out of their way to change the protocols for getting players in and out of the lineup. We'll talk a little bit more in a future game regarding that. But yeah, like obviously the last 2 weeks are kind of throw it out, with the trash here with so many sort of random players playing. We talk about Washington starting a middle linebacker who had never played a defensive snap in the NFL, like not ideal. And that stuff matters in the NFL when you are only as good as your worst player, right? If there is a bad player on the field, that human being is going to be exposed. And that's what Dallas did to Washington. You're getting 6 points here with the Cards. Like, just on a straight value concept, like you got to do that. And listen, if they beat the Colts, if that game ends, what was it, 15-14 at one point, right? Where the Cardinals are up a point. If that even game just ends with them winning by 1, I don't think we're getting 6, right? And if Dallas happened to play a team that was fully healthy, I don't think we're getting 6. So again, we can overreact to last week because like we always say, you replay that game and those games over and over in your mind, and the stench and the bad taste of Cliff Kingsbury's coaching stays with you for a week, especially on national television the way that it was. Yeah, man, the value here is on the Cardinals, and it's gross because like it feels bad, but there's a difference between feeling bad because you have to bet the Jags or you have to bet the Jets or you have to bet the Texans. And then there's feeling bad because you have to bet a quote unquote good team, a team that's going to the playoffs because you don't feel great about it. Those are the best bets in the NFL. And we have been taking advantage of those all season long. So whether it's +6, +200 on the money line, I think the Cardinals are live this week, as sort of much as it pains me to say.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And that's where, me looking at the line doesn't pass the sniff test, because the sniff test is, wait a second, I feel like if the perception of what we're coming off, that line should be bigger, right? Yeah. But the fact that it's not, it's like, wait a second here. Okay.
Yeah, there's only so as high as it can go, right? Yeah.
Exactly, right? You're right. As we move on here, because this next line is kind of interesting to me as well, is the 8-7 Raiders are at the 9-6 Colts. Colts at home, -7. This is interesting for so many different reasons, but one, we'll start here and just say the Raiders somehow still have a chance to make the playoffs. So this is a must win for them. The Colts, we know, have been rolling. It's all running game and defense, but Carson Wentz found himself on the COVID list around the exact same time that they've managed to change said rules, to which he might actually be able to come back and play in this game, but it still makes for a tough week of practice. But then again, it is Carson Wentz. We've been talking about how he just handing the ball off. Either way, I think the 7 points is too much. And there's just a lot going on with the Colts right now. I don't like it. And I say this a lot. I don't like it, but I'll take the Raiders and the +7.
Yeah, so this is the situation for this game. And, there's probably like a cool wire quote for this, right? Like we talk about the game is the game and all of that sort of thing. There's probably a better quote along the lines here. Like just when you think you've got the game figured out, they change it. I don't know if that's a quote somewhere along the line. There's got to be, a song lyric in there somewhere. Yeah, again, as part of our toolkit here in handicapping, right? Like we didn't think we were going to have to start doing the math on, COVID stuff and, who's going to be out and how many days and, testing in and testing out and blah, 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 blah. Right. And it's like, we talk about the transfer portal in college football. Like there's a portal of COVID, and like, do the transfer portal people ever see the people in the COVID protocols? Do they ever cross each other in those portals? I don't know. Right. It's a whole intergalactic thing that I don't necessarily understand. So you try to change the way that you sort of bet, right? You try to get ahead of information. And so when this news comes out on Monday, you go, oh man, I better grab the Raiders. There was some +8 out there and, +7, +6 even that still lingered, knowing that if Sam Ehlinger, the backup quarterback for the Colts, shout out Texas Longhorns, in his 11-year Texas Longhorn career, if he plays, this game's gonna be closer to a pick 'em. I write my column for The Score about the teasers in front, and the best value and the sort of mathematical approach with regards to capturing key numbers. And I had to change my column because I had to sort of write just the idea of Carson Wentz and just waiting on his status, because if the Colts are -7, -1 is a really interesting teaser leg, right, on the Colts. If the number drops to 2.5, which is sort of what the rumor was, that the number was going to go down to Colts -2.5 with Ehlinger in, because Ehlinger can hand the ball off just as easily as Carson Wentz can hand the ball off. If that goes down to -2.5, guess what? The Raiders become a really interesting tease piece at +8.5. You'd be getting +8.5 with the Raiders with Sam Ehlinger as a starting quarterback. And so all that's going on. I'm scooping up some Raiders, +8, +7, all of that sort of thing. And then they change the game on us, right? They go, oh, well, we're going to go to the CDC here. We're going to go to the new protocols. We're going to go to a 5-day quarantine instead of a 10-day quarantine for unvaxxed quarterbacks in this case. And you're sitting there going, oh, so he is going to play? Like, what am I running around like grabbing Raiders bets for if I didn't have to? And so, yeah, like I'm sort of pot committed already to, because I grabbed the +8 with the Raiders early on in the week, thinking I was going to get, dare I say it, some closing line value if this thing ended up closing closer to a pick 'em. So, all's not lost here. This number's at 7. I think that's probably a pretty good number. There's a very, reasonable chance the Raiders, again, won another game last week. The amount of teams that are somehow still in the playoff race, by the way, which again, I think was the point in doing two things. One, adding the 7th team where like the Bears were in the playoffs last year. And we all somehow forgot that the Bears made the playoffs last year because like they're terrible. The amount of teams that are still involved here on both conferences, like the Falcons won a game against the Lions barely last week, and it's like, yep, another one in the win column for the Falcons. And the Raiders barely win a game against Drew Lock, and it's like, yeah, another one in the win column. They're up to what, 8 and 7. So you're like, what? Like that team is still eligible to be a playoff team. And so the point is, like, this isn't, oh, the Raiders just playing out the string, which like to us who, have team ratings and don't necessarily have the Raiders in like the top 17, we're sitting there going, oh my God, yeah, the Raiders, like, they're going to be playing like their lives depend on it in this game, right? And whether that actually means anything, because the Raiders are just not good, it's a completely different story. So anyway, this is really more important relative to the change in the protocols than any sort of significant bet that I have, right? So this isn't like best bet type territory here. This is really just, can you believe this is what we're doing here, where guys who get test positive on Monday can play if you test on Wednesday? And listen, it's Friday morning. You know how that goes, right? All the testing post-practice on Friday that's going to have random superstar out of these games. Like, it's going to be brutal, and no amount of changing the protocols is going to change what happens on Friday and Saturday from a testing standpoint. So again, just hang on to it here. Let's see what happens over the next couple of days. But at least stuff that happens on Monday might not reflect what happens on Sunday. But again, the word might is in there, and we don't know for sure whether Wentz is going to be able to play in this game, though the line right now indicates that he will, because if he doesn't, I think this thing drops under a field goal.
Totally agree. Let's get to the best bets though. And, we'll start here. 7-8 Falcons at the 9-6 Bills. Bills favored by 14.5 points. The Bills are in a fight here as, they obviously try to win their division, obviously trying to stay in the race to win the conference and get that bye. There's lots going on here. But this line here, right? Mm-hmm. I look at it, and as you just mentioned, the Falcons, they're in the mix somehow. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a world, they're still in the mix. Yeah. So at 14.5, I'm like, I guess I got to take the Falcons. Like, isn't that way too many points for a team that is probably still going to try, even though I know the Bills are better and way better, but the Falcons are still in the mix here. They're in the hunt. 14.5 points is a lot, and I do not like this at all. But I'll say the half point is helping me here a little. But I can't believe I'm saying that. I'm struggling. Like, it's the concept of struggling to take a team that is in the mix, but you're 14.5 point underdogs. Right. Like, that sentence just seems weird to me. That's what's messing me up.
Yeah. And these days, right, like a double-digit 14-point spread is usually saved for the teams like running out their second string quarterback or just running out a guy who's awful, and like COVID protocols have sort of put themselves in this position. Like, again, I refer to it every week because it's super fresh in my mind, right? But again, I watched Man in the Arena, the Tom Brady series documentary, and it's so good. And you forget, like, Matt Ryan was the MVP of the NFL 5 years ago, not 9 years ago, not 11 years ago. 5. That was 2016 when they went to that Super Bowl and had that Super Bowl won, except for the fact of Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. And listen, second half Matt Ryan. All that is to say, like, we're not talking about Blaine Gabbert getting the start here. We're talking about Matt Ryan. Like, they should be able to do something. Now, we see them get blown out. What you're going to hear from a lot of people this week is every time the Falcons play someone good, they get blown out. And that's true. And every time they play somebody bad, they end up winning barely. And that's how they have whatever it is, 7-8 wins that they have. I think odds makers are aware of that fact. If you and I are aware of that fact, I think odds makers are aware of that fact, right? Like, that is, as we say, that's what the money's for. That's what the point spread is for. And so you're wondering, like, why are we getting this extra half point? Because I think people are willing to back the Bills minus 14 because the Falcons have had such little success against good teams. But we know that that's not all necessarily what it's cracked up to be. Think about it. I'll give you 3 games real quick. 2 games against the Bucs. We know that they played tightly with the Bucs. 3-point game going into the fourth quarter early on in the season. Now, Matt Ryan gets a couple passes deflected. They go right to Buccaneers players and they get returned for touchdowns. And you'll recall they end up losing that game by 20. And so when we look back at that, we go, oh man, they lost to the Bucs by 20. Anytime they play a good team, like, they get smoked. And you go, okay, but like, I watched that game. I know what happened. They play the Bucs again, 3-point game late in the third quarter. The Buccaneers get a touchdown to go up 10. They get a field goal to end up covering that game because the Buccaneers weren't able to finish that game out with kneel downs. They had to kick the field goal. You look back at that score and you go, well, Falcons played the Bucs and they lost by 13. And that was after losing by 20. This team must stink. 2 weeks ago, the San Francisco 49ers, the Falcons had every opportunity consistently in the red zone, something like 0 for 14 on plays in the red zone from scoring a touchdown. Many opportunities. Yeah. Might they fail again? Yeah, they're the Falcons. Of course they might fail again. But the point is, this isn't a team that's running out second string quarterback who's not going to be able to do anything. A couple of things on the field, why I think the Falcons can hang in this game, right? Obviously, Terrell, one of their better cornerbacks in the league, one of the biggest surprises from where he was drafted. It's why we never know what the deal is with the draft. We thought he was going to be a bust. He ends up being very good, one of the better quarterbacks in the league. He gets a shot at Stephon Diggs. Is he going to shut down Stephon Diggs? No, I don't know that anybody necessarily does. But if you're going to play the Bills, it's nice to have one of the top cornerbacks in the league. And then secondarily on offense, we've talked about the Falcons' run game getting better throughout the season. So their offensive line is going to be sort of rated poorly from the first half of the season when they couldn't run and they couldn't pass block. In this case, the run game has gotten better. We've talked about watching them off the left side, being able to use both Patterson and Davis. What do we know about the Bills? The run defense. not so good, right? The Falcons, I think, are going to be able to run the football on the Bills. I'm not saying we should back the Falcons here at plus 650, but like it is plus 650 on the money line for it. You know what I mean? Like it still is. And again, the Bills are a team that lost to the Jaguars. Like this, and by the way, like spot situation here, Falcons not out of it, still caring, still trying. So again, when we talk about the backup quarterback theory and like teams being out of it, like that's normally, you look at all these other double-digit spreads, that's the team that we'd be backing as a plus 14.5, underdog. Not the case for the Falcons. Meanwhile, you think that game was important to the Bills last week against the Patriots on the road, where they played their best game of the season, left it all out in the field, cliche this, cliche that. I don't know how you get up the next week for a game against the Falcons when you know all you need to do is win this game and then win next week against, I believe, the Jets that they're playing next week. Like this, the AFC East is wrapped and they don't need to win this game by 15. The Falcons need to try to win this football game and try, as obviously part of that, keep that game close. So I think 14.5 here, we're getting that 14.5 because people look and see, well, the Bills, they beat up on bad teams and the Falcons, they lose to good teams. But I think that's built into this point spread. And it's why we're getting the hook at plus 14.5.
I like it. I can't really say I like this one, but we move on to the Dolphins, who have a very strange relationship with this season, but they're 8-7. Somehow we know they had the long 7-game losing streak, 7-game win streak. They're at the Tennessee Titans, who are 10-5 this season. Titans are minus 3.5 in this game. And I don't like the hook, but as mentioned, I really don't like the Dolphins. And the reason being their win streak. They have beaten the powerhouses of the NFL, namely the Texans, Ravens on a Thursday night, the Jets, the Panthers, the Giants, the Jets again, and your man's Ian Book and the Saints. Get out of here. Give me the Titans. I am taking the Titans. I don't even like the hook. The hook normally would make me kind of pause here, but the Dolphins, we watched them struggle to convincingly beat Ian Book last week. So give me the Titans here.
We just talked about the Georgia game. Doesn't this feel like that where people are going to want to bet the Dolphins, right? People are going, they just won 7 straight games. Like you mentioned, 7 losses, then 7 straight wins, first team in NFL history to do that. People are going to want to bet the Dolphins. This looks like a live underdog. This looks like a team. Oh man, what if they win their next 2 games, quote unquote winnable games here? They could make the playoffs. This is going to, this would be crazy. I don't think so. You just ran down the teams and the quarterbacks associated with those teams. The only good one, the only even serviceable one is Lamar Jackson. And the good news is that was a Thursday night game. We watched that game. We watched 3 quarters of that game, knowing that neither team deserved to win that game. And so if you just looked at that game, that game feels a lot like the Saints-Bucks game from 2 weeks ago, where congrats on the win, right? But we come back the next week and we go the Saints scored 9 points last week. Yeah, they won the game. They shut out the Bucks, but 9. How excited am I supposed to get? So how excited am I supposed to get about that Dolphins team beating the Ravens, who again, you and I, not even really that high on the Ravens to begin with, right? And so kind of a janky win on that Thursday night, right? It was, we talked at length about it at the time. So I'm just sitting there going okay, that's kind of a cool win on the schedule. If you were going to go down and be where could they have a 7-game win streak? You would probably circle Ravens as a loss there, but they get one sort of surprising win. And now all of a sudden that connects everything and they end up with this 7-game win streak. Whereas Tennessee, now the key here, AJ Brown, little calf injury early on in the week that he's sort of in and out of practice. Got to make sure that he plays because he matters here. But from a line standpoint, this looks like the book's going, you want some Miami? You can have as much Miami as you want. And every time it goes down to -3, then the money comes in on Tennessee. And so maybe this game ends up closing -3 for Tennessee. The big contest in Las Vegas, we always talk about the line that they come up with on Thursday for their static line that has to stay the same. A lot of it's sort of a prediction of where the closing line is going to be here. They predict that this line will be Tennessee -3. I love that Tennessee -3. I hope it gets to Tennessee -3. You guys can have your Miami Dolphins here. I'll take the Titans. I think this is a game. It's just as important to them as it is the Dolphins. This is an actual functional offense with a decent quarterback at the very least in Ryan Tannehill. I like the Titans here. Again, I don't love the hook either, just from a probability standpoint here. But I think it is, you use the term fishy. I think it's a little bit fishy, pardon the pun, that the Dolphins are getting the hook here. Give me the Titans in this one.
The next game, I like. There's no reason for me to want anything to do with this game, but it's the 4-11 Giants and the 5-10 Chicago Bears. The Bears are favored by 6. Yeah. And normally I wouldn't want anything to do with the Bears laying 6 points. I really don't, but I feel like the Bears, for some strange reason, are still like doing stuff. I'm not saying that they're doing
they won last week
stuff. No, but I'm saying like they still look like they're, doing stuff. Whereas the Giants, they might just be done, right? They might be in Cancun already, maybe Cabo, mixing it up a little, but I feel like I'm laying the points here with the Bears and I'm not liking it. Laying the points with the Bears is not a place that I really want to be at all, but I don't want to be relying on the Giants to do literally anything.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the situation. A couple of different things. We'll get to the more basic one here in a second, but I got a little random tangent here for you. I know you love my random tangents. It's the holiday week, right? What do we do during the holiday week? We're having some beverages, we're eating some food, we're eating some more food, and then we're having some more food after that, right? The candies, the sweets, the savory, everything is just happening in our face. So hop on the old Peloton a couple of days ago, right? Have a good hard ride, as if like that's going to make everything go away. Why? Because that makes me feel like I'm doing stuff. And I'm sitting here and I'm waiting for next year when it comes to like daily Peloton rides, because we're still in holiday season. Gonna have some beverages tonight, New Year's Eve. Shout out New Year's Eve. Happy New Year's Eve to everybody. Gonna have some beverages, gonna have some appies, all of that sort of thing. Am I gonna get on the Peloton tomorrow? Like, as of right now, I would say that I am, but like, let's be honest, could be a little hungover. It might just be a good long stretch tomorrow morning, right? Like, I'm not going to actually ride. Sure. The point is, I'm sitting here right now thinking about next year. Now, unfortunately for me, next year happens tomorrow. The Bears right now are doing stuff. They got their win. That was their little Peloton ride. Okay. That made them feel like they are, as you said, doing something, right? Like they lost a couple of games. They had some primetime games that they were up for. They gave their best effort. Justin Fields looked good. And then it was like, oh God, Nick Foles has to start. But you know what? It's a snow game. Like there's something about a snow game that's at least going to get both teams' attention. Some cases, teams completely melt in that case. But in this case, they got their attention. They also almost lost that game by double digits. They happened to come back and make it a close game. And of course, got a couple of breaks and obviously one of my favorite catches of the year with the Demir Bird catch. The point is they kind of did their real little Peloton ride. And now they can kind of have a couple of beverages. Now, they can feel good about themselves going into next year. And maybe they step up next week. I believe it's the Vikings that they play next week on the road. I don't really think that's all that likely. I think that might be their last victory of the season. Now, the problem is the New York Giants are coming to town, and they are, I think, right now, the worst team in the league. And here comes the second part. What's our premise in the last 2-3 weeks of the season? If two teams who have nothing to play for are just out there running around for no purpose whatsoever, but one of those two teams is favored by a touchdown, and one of those teams is plus 200 on the money line, you just take the underdog, right? Because they are just individual humans. Like if you and I got a bunch of dudes together and we went to the park and we played out in the snow for a football game, how do you handicap that game, right? Maybe a couple of guys just don't care about the game. Maybe you got your try-hard buddies who are absolutely looking to like relive the old days. That's kind of the situation here with the Giants and the Bears. Now, the Giants are terrible. I imagine Mike Glennon's going to be back in here. I'll call him a professional quarterback, though I'm not positive. I'm certainly not sure that Jake Fromm is a professional quarterback. I think the best unit out there is actually the Giants defense. They actually hung in with the Eagles last week before getting blown out in the second half because the offense just couldn't do anything. I think the offense does a little bit here against the Bears. I think this game ends up pretty close. It's obviously, super low total, not going to be a ton of scoring. That leaves open the possibility for something weird to happen and the Giants pulling off the victory. So give me the Giants plus the points. And this is, again, one of many this week where give me the Giants, the underdog on the money line, and hope that they have a nice little Peloton ride this week before getting back to their old ways of eating Lindor chocolates while watching football games.
It's essentially just using my old phrase against me. Two crappy teams just take the points, right? Sometimes you just overthink it.
That's right. Yeah.
Sometimes you're just overthinking. I hear you. I'm looking ahead here at this 5-10 Panthers team at the 7-8 Saints. Saints favored at home by 6.5 points. And I know the Panthers are bad. I really do know that. But I don't know. Am I ready to take the Saints to beat anybody by almost a touchdown?
No.
I don't think I can do that. And I know the Panthers are trash. Like I saw,
yeah,
I'm familiar with their work. Right?
That's right.
But
I've heard somebody say that. 6.5
points is a lot.
Yeah.
6.5 points is a lot.
Yeah, of course not, man. Like, yeah, you're not trusting the Saints here. Like, no, like, okay, Taysom Hill's back and all of a sudden, like, all's well. Like, 9 points 2 weeks ago. Like, again, I hate to harp on it, right? But like the Buccaneers defense as currently constructed is not good enough to just get 9 points against. You should be getting more, right? And yeah, the defense was outstanding and was again, held on last week sort of as best they could. And Sam Darnold's going to start. So we don't, again, as much as Sam Darnold excites absolutely no one, at least it's not Cam Newton. Cam Newton is the worst quarterback in the entire league who you've heard of right now. Of course, you may have heard of Jake Fromm, but not because he's done anything. He would maybe be the worst quarterback in the unfortunately, there's a billion different quarterbacks who could be the worst quarterback in the league. Yeah. But Cam Newton just cannot throw the football. And again, he's still going to play. He's still going to be suited up. He can still come in for red zone goal to go short yardage type situations. But just allowing Sam Darnold to play here, I think, is the difference. Because, again, Taysom Hill, Sam Darnold, like Taysom Hill might do more stuff, but Sam Darnold's the better thrower of the football. And you're sitting there going like, yeah, but the Saints defense could, shut him down here. I think both these teams are pretty similar right now, right? They have good defenses and absolutely janky quarterback play. And I just look back to the previous matchup where Sam Darnold played against the Saints and they won 26-7, something along those lines. Like if Sam Darnold can drive the car around, right? If he can get it around the course against the Saints in that game, he can do it again in this game. So this is yet another one. I know the Saints, again, yet another team. You look at their record and they're like, oh my God, they kind of think that they might actually be in this thing for the seventh spot. In the mix. In the hunt, as the graphic always says.
I prefer in the mix. I'm
an in the mix guy. I'm just saying the in the hunt graphic is the legend, right? At this point, you need God rest his soul, John Madden. You need them, Pat Summerall to fire up the old graphic here from 1992 and just says in the hunt, and somehow the Saints are on that list. Again, if you're in a must-win situation, you must not be very good. This was an overreaction when this line was 7. It's down to 6.5, 6 at this point. I think that tells you all you need to know. I think the Panthers are alive. Some of these teams, Giants are one of them. Again, same sort of premise here, even though the Saints do need this game a little bit more than obviously some of these other teams, but the same premise. Sometimes it's just better to get away from home when you're not very good. Like for the Panthers, playing in Carolina was probably a bummer. For the Giants, playing in the Meadowlands, it's probably a bummer. Getting out on the road here, I think, is actually a good thing for both of these teams. I think both of those teams are live. Give me Carolina plus the points. Give me them on the money line. Let's fire it up. What could possibly go wrong?
Take the points. We'll see some Cam Newton celebrating maybe. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe that's going too far. Maybe it's
1-yard touchdown drive.
No, I'm joking. Yeah. Right. The 8-7 Eagles are 3-point favorites at the 6-9 Washington football team. The football team, as mentioned, got embarrassed last week against the Cowboys. And I'm not saying they're going to get embarrassed this week, but they'll lose by 3 at least. I'm on the Eagles and I will lay the points. That's just where I'm at here. I know, should take the home dog. I get it. But as long as it's still 3, I'll take the Eagles.
Listen, man, we all like the Washington football team. We did up until 2 weeks ago. right? Like that was a team that we were backing. Oh, and like
I don't know about like. I don't know about like. I was going to say something super inappropriate, but I'll just keep it going.
No, but you know what? They were winning games, right? Like things were happening. And then, everybody was all about them as home underdogs against the Cowboys, 3 weeks ago, right? Because they had strung together those victories. They had beaten the Buccaneers, right? Like, you go back, man, go back and listen. Like you and I were on the Cowboys that day. Yeah. It was a sort of go against the grain, road favorite type of pick, something that we don't normally do. But we talked about like they were getting, too few points. Now that line ended up going up by kickoff, but that wasn't like public money piling in. People were backing Washington to great success up until that Cowboys game. Ever since then, the only thing that's really happened is that COVID has absolutely ripped through that locker room. Right. Yes. And obviously blowout against Philly, 11 days ago, right? Like not that long ago. And so obviously you're going to look at this game and be like, man, this number is really short, especially at -3. But, again, we talk about where the line started, where it's at right now. This number was higher. This was +3.5. I grabbed +3.5. I've got +3.5 on the Washington football team. I get it -3 Philadelphia. I don't even hate that bet sort of conceptually. I just know that +3.5 was too big of a number because if you look back before COVID ripped through and postponed that game against Philly the first time around, the game was in Philadelphia. The point spread was -3.5, was -4, 4.5. Before it moved it moved to 10, and then it sort of came back because it was like they postponed the game and it was down to 8, and then it's like, well, they're still not getting any players back, and so it moved right back to 10, and we went on that roller coaster ride, and I think the game ended up being a 10-point victory. And so, but just think about the opening line here again, pre-COVID ravaging. If they're -3.5, -4 at home, how is Philadelphia -3.5, -4 on the road just 2 weeks later with the expectation that Washington are going to get their players back? Now, again, it's a terrible look that they're punching people in the face on the sideline and poking each other in the eyebrow and whatnot.
That was incredible.
And they lost by, and frankly, should have probably lost by 70. Like if the Cowboys had wanted to, if they had any motivation to do so, they would have hung 70 on Washington that day. But again, Jamin Davis could be back here. I expect him back. They don't have a guy off the street as their middle linebacker. All of these things here, I think, make Washington the live home underdog in this game. Because again, you have to remember what the team was before what we've seen in the last couple of weeks. And just because some of the starters have been playing doesn't mean, again, you're only as good as your worst player. Some of those guys on the offensive line, on the defense, pretty rough. Those guys should be gone. The starters should be back. And we have to treat this team like we treated them 3 weeks ago when Dallas was just a 4 or 5 point favorite right up until, the money steamed in. And I think Dallas is a much better team than the Philadelphia Eagles are, right? So again, is it 2 points difference? I think it's probably a little bit more than that for the Cowboys. So again, you have to do all that sort of comparison, whether it's the past, previous matchup or previous teams that they've matched up against here. I think 3.5 was too high. If you can get 3.5, absolutely go for it with the Washington football team. Again, another one, I think they're live to win.
One thing that's very interesting about this line is how much I'm focusing on the football team instead of being focused in on the Eagles. And do the Eagles really deserve to be 3-point road favorites against anyone?
Yeah, it's been like that a lot this season, right? Where it's like the Eagles are just kind of eagling around and you're just like, oh yeah, okay, cool. Every matchup, it really has a lot more to do with the other team. But, look at some of the schedule. And it's really been interesting in the NFC East where you've had sort of these teams that have had an easier schedule for 6 straight weeks and then have a tougher stretch for 6 straight weeks. And when you get to the end of it, they kind of all have the same record, but you think differently about these teams, right? So the Giants play all of these tougher teams, more recently, and they have a really bad go of it. Obviously, they're probably not a great example because Daniel Jones isn't involved, but the Eagles, right? Their schedule has been really soft over the last little while. And we didn't think that much of the Eagles early on in the season when they're playing the Chiefs and the Chargers and some of these better teams. So you start playing, especially the divisional matchups where you're playing the Giants a couple of times, that's going to make things look a lot better. Right. And so again, I understand listen, the Eagles lost to the Giants, right? Like 4 weeks ago. Like this isn't a team that is quote unquote that good that you should be trusting necessarily laying points on the road here again, especially if Washington is back to full strength.
Totally fair, my dude. Totally fair. Speaking of teams laying points, the 8-7 San Francisco 49ers laying 12.5 points at home to my favorite squad, the 4-11 Houston Texans. I can't even believe they won 4 games this season, but here we are.
Right.
Now, that's a lot of points to lay with the Niners, and it's very interesting because this is a Trey Lance game. And Shanahan has said that the last few weeks have been the best week of practice for Trey Lance so far. Now, what else is he going to say? Cool, right? I get that. Yeah. Totally understand it. But we've talked before about, the last time we saw Trey Lance, was Shanahan even bringing out the actual Trey Lance plays, right? Like I was always curious about that. Like you're watching him play and you're like, wait, what's happening right now?
Yeah.
Either way, with all of that said, 12.5 points is way too many points for me to lay with the San Francisco 49ers. Like no matter what, like they could bring out the old school Kaepernick plays from when Kaepernick first came out and he was flexing all over the place and all that stuff. But 12.5 points. Nah, I'm definitely not about that life, even with the Houston Texans.
Yeah. And you say that as a 49ers fan, which is always, when we come to the 49ers games, always fun for me to figure out sort of what your take is on this game. And like, I'm there with you. And here's the thing. You're getting 12.5 points. It's a plus 500 on the money line. And are we positive the favorite has the better quarterback in this game? I'm not as currently constructed.
That hurts my feelings. I'm not going to lie to you. That really hurts my feelings.
It isn't which one would I rather have for like eternity and all of that sort of thing. And when you draft a quarterback that high, right, the sort of feeling is you're supposed to start him right away. But as we know, like the point of getting Trey Lance is for the future. And like Jimmy G was going to start. And if it went really badly and Trey Lance like developed really quickly, that was going to be, it's going to become his team sooner than later. I don't think that has happened, right? I think the 49ers are maybe somewhat embarrassed that their guy isn't ready to go yet. And that's why we haven't even seen like the Trey Lance packages in the last few weeks, right? Like remember at the start of the year, it was like, oh, here comes Trey Lance to like run a short yardage play or a goal line play. Like the 49ers have figured out that Jimmy G is fine running this offense, maybe without, if he doesn't have a broken hand, things might be a little bit easier, but like he's fine doing so. Let's just put it in. He's better at putting it in the hands of the weapons that he has. Whereas when we see Trey Lance play, that isn't the case. And again, I don't trust Shanahan to run the Trey Lance plays. Like we saw it against Arizona earlier this year, where it's like 3rd and 1, 4th and 1. He's like, well, let's roll him out for a pass play. It's like, no, man, like that's not what you should be doing. Like you have all these other guys. You should be running the football with Lance. You should be running the football with the Deebo Samuels of the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Point is, Davis Mills, I think, is actually the better quarterback here. And Davis Mills, and people go like, it's Davis Mills. And the first we saw of him was his first start. It was Thursday night. First impressions, man. Like it's not going to be great. Like Ian Book is never going to move past what we saw from Monday. Now, Ian Book is an okay player and has some okay talent. Davis Mills was a guy who was ranked higher than like Trevor Lawrence coming out of high school, right? That's a talent element. Now he suffered a bunch of injuries at Stanford and he only played like 10 games. But he still ended up almost getting drafted. We've talked about this before. Like he was almost the 6th quarterback in that first round last year as people were talking themselves into the Trey Lances and the Zach Wilsons of the world, whereas Davis Mills has the better pedigree. And now all of a sudden we've seen him play a handful of games here in and out of the lineup, got a chance to sort of watch Tyrod Taylor. And then now he comes back in and now he's like throwing the ball around. I sort of was on this relatively early because of that Patriots game where I was watching this guy throw it around and I was like, this guy can throw the football. He can make the reads. Now the team that surrounds him is awful. And I look at the running back position, a position that you and we don't think that, highly of with regards to like the import of the individuals behind. But Rex Burkhead blew his knee out. I watched that game last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago now. But that's a guy who is a very good player for the Patriots, right? That's why he got, the deal that's why he's not out of the league, right? Because he can catch the ball out of the backfield. He can run the ball. He's not going to be that like explosive. He's not going to take it 80 yards to the house, but he's going to play very good football. David Johnson was not the answer. But when you trade DeAndre Hopkins for David Johnson, you're kind of pot committed to David Johnson for as long as you possibly can. Mark Ingram, right? They traded him to the Saints. I'm sorry, where's Mark Ingram right now as far as helping the Saints do anything? He's not, right? And so he was a guy who was getting heavy run earlier on in the season. Philip Lindsay is a guy who was getting heavy run early on in the season. He's gone now. And so they've wiped out 3 guys in their running back room, and now they're rolling with Rex Burkhead and Royce Freeman, 2 guys who nobody's going to be all that excited about, but do what they do, and they do it well, right? Rex Burkhead is a solid player. And when you're the Houston Texans, all you need is solid players right now to just be functional. They beat the Chargers last week without Brandon Cooks. I didn't think the offense was going to move the ball at all, but they had some of these other guys, right? Again, sort of blast from the past type guys. Former Patriots wide receiver is in there. Chris Conley, who was, a rerun from another team before, like guys who have been in and around the league, and they're not flashy and they're not exciting, but they're at least functional right now, which is kind of crazy to say about the Houston Texans. So all of that is to say, could the 49ers just run like the run plays and the short stuff, and like could George Kittle get 110 yards? All of these things are entirely possible, but they were way more likely to happen with Jimmy G as the quarterback. And so I don't know where this line would have necessarily been with Garoppolo, but I can't imagine it would be that much higher than it is now. I don't know that it would be over 14 in that 14 and a half range that we saw with the Falcons and the Bills, right? I still think it would be under 14. You said it yourself. Can't believe they have 4 wins. Right? Like they don't feel like a team that with the way that we've talked about them this season being as, the worst team in the league coming into the season, being underdogs at home to the Jags in week 1, and then 5.5-point underdogs to the Jags in 2 weeks ago. This is kind of low key a team that has like outperformed expectations in the last 6-7 weeks, like covering spreads, winning games at Tennessee, again, beating the Chargers, even though the Chargers were absolutely depleted beyond belief. But like that might be the 49ers this week, right? That might be the case with Trey Lance as the quarterback. So I'm absolutely taking the Texans here plus the 12.5. That's probably sort of as low as I'd be willing to go necessarily. But we're also looking at plus 500 money line. I wrote this week my money line, the old round robin money line parlay column. You need sort of a big underdog in there to juice things up and hope that lottery ticket hits. And with all the different choices that there are this week, I think the Texans are the best one that might pull off a victory, because I think they are starting the better quarterback this week, which is kind of crazy to say from a 12.5-point underdog.
Super interesting stuff as always. Let's keep it going though. The 7-8 Broncos are at the 8-7 Chargers. Chargers 6.5-point favorites at home. And you just mentioned it, right? The Chargers losing last week to the Texans. They were missing a lot of their top guys. First off, I'll ask, are some of these dudes back in the lineup? What's the update there? And again, who knows? Because we know the times that we're in. The Chargers, again, 6.5-point favorites. And I mean, the Broncos, I don't know what we're really doing here with the Broncos. It's been such a weird season, but I feel like the Chargers in this instance, I want to lay the points with them, because I feel like if their guys can come back, or even if their guys don't come back, it's another week of the dudes that had to play last week, at least, got some reps in,
sure.
Hopefully, and it's less than a touchdown. And I don't like it. But I really don't like anything about the Broncos.
Yeah,
even though they're 7-8, I don't know how that's a record either.
Again,
the NFL's messed up.
That's right. Crucial loss last week, somehow knocking them out of legitimate playoff contention. Unbelievable. You know what? I'm right there with you from a concept standpoint, but I kind of think it applies to Drew Lock this week. Okay. I think last week getting a chance to play a full game was probably not a great spot for Drew Lock. And listen, there's nothing to like about Drew Lock. There's nothing to like about them. I mean, there's something to like about the Broncos. I mean, listen, they still have their guys. As long as Javonte Williams is on that team, and if for some reason they actually figure out that he's their best running back, and listen, Melvin Gordon has made a career out of not being the best running back on his team and getting carries like he is the best running back on the team. Like that guy was getting carries carries over Austin Eckler with the Chargers. And when his contract came up, like they couldn't have pushed him out the door fast enough because he blew multiple games. Like people blame Phillip Rivers for a lot of the Chargers' woes down sort of the stretch there of his career. But like it was Melvin Gordon fumbles, Melvin Gordon drops on third down. Like there was a lot of fingers that needed to be pointed at Melvin Gordon. And now he's still just playing and getting run here for the Broncos, where every time you watch Javonte Williams, every time Melvin Gordon doesn't play in a game, Javonte Williams balls out. So at some point they're going to show him some love and actually be able to run him 20 times. And if you do that against the Chargers, if they just hand the ball to Javonte Williams, the Broncos are going to win this game against the Chargers. They're going to flat out win this game against the Chargers. Listen, I'm a big Staley guy. I think Justin Herbert is awesome, but you mentioned it, right? Like who is actually going to play? And more importantly, do we trust the Chargers to cover a number in this case? And that's a big number to cover when your defense can't get any stops. Now, again, maybe Joey Bosa plays this week, right? After not playing last week, which obviously gave Davis Mills all the time in the world. And maybe Nick Bosa has a lot more success this week against Davis Mills. Hopefully not, based on what we just sort of talked about. But it's not just Joey Bosa, man. Like the team's been bad defensively with beyond just him. And when they get good defensively, when they have flashes of greatness defensively, it's because Derwin James is in the lineup. Derwin James is not going to be in the lineup this week. It does not appear, right? And if he is, right, it's like, how long is he going to last? Because he's battling that dreaded hamstring issue, that when you're a do-it-all defensive player in the secondary, you kind of need both your hamstrings to be on point. And so I think Derwin James is the key to this team defensively, not Joey Bosa. The Broncos can protect Drew Lock by just putting something extra on the side of Joey Bosa. Whether that turns into Drew Lock doing much, again, he can make the throws. We didn't necessarily see it last week, but he's got weapons, man. He's got weapons. And so I think the Broncos are live to win this game. This is yet another circumstance of a previous matchup that the underdog won, right? We talked about it with the Panthers. Like the Broncos won this game in Denver. Now, obviously, you and I talk about it like you just automatically bet the Broncos against the Chargers in Denver every time. Again, I have to back the Broncos again here. I'd like to get 7, but I think it's telling that a lot of these lines are 6, 6.5, that they're not willing to give you 7 points with some of these teams. Because I think a lot of these teams are live to win this week, and I think Denver is one of them.
Super interesting stuff. And I think ultimately for me, it comes down to the injuries. And if you're telling me some of these big names are still not in the lineup, then it's just not responsible to lay that many points. It just isn't.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean they can't win, but it's just not responsible to do so. You mentioned the 6.5 point spreads, and there is another one that we can watch on Sunday Night Football as Mr. Kirk Cousins back on prime time on Sunday Night Football, and his Vikings in Green Bay taking on the 12-3 Green Bay Packers. Yeah. Now, Kirk Cousins in general is never really a side that I enjoy being on. Kirk Cousins in primetime is never really a side that I enjoy being on. But I've been on this thing against the Packers a lot where, their lines are just juiced up, and I'm not playing the outcome, because we know that a lot of these times they've managed to cover games that they probably shouldn't have. So the number of their ATS records is better than what the eye test would show. And I still am a dude that I like to pay attention to the eye test sometimes. 6.5 points, too many points. I'm on the Vikings.
Yeah, absolutely. And this isn't that complicated, right? It's like we just watched this with the Browns, and Baker Mayfield throws 4 interceptions. And that's literally the only reason that the Packers won that game, is that they just they just literally was like, I was yelling at the TV. I'm like, he did it again. He did it again. And it's just like, what are you doing, man? What are you doing? And so, like the Kirk Cousins thing, it can be a real bummer. I'm certainly no Kirk Cousins fan, if you will, but he's not going to throw 4 interceptions. This is literally Vikings just do what the Browns did last week, only don't do the interception part. Like that's all that we're right. Like Dalvin Cook can play the role of Nick Chubb, and Dalvin Cook is going to be back for this game. And Dalvin Cook absolutely rips the Packers. And he also does it particularly at Lambeau Field, 150 plus yards the last 2 times he's played at Lambeau Field. They won quite comfortably last year when they took that trip to Lambeau Field. Day game, not a night game. Don't know if that necessarily matters. Obviously, we have the Kirk Cousins, night narrative, and we talked about congrats on Kirk winning the last 2 games that he played at night, even though he didn't do anything in either of those games. But guess what? He doesn't have to do anything in this game either. If Baker Mayfield just did nothing in that game last week, the Browns win that game. They covered. That's great. But we're looking for wins out here in the NFL. I think the Vikings get this win. At the start of the season, my premise for some betting and some bets that went poorly, we did, again, we've talked about the end of the year stuff, end of the year content we've done over at the Score. One of them is admitting to our worst bets. And one of my worst bet was Mike Zimmer, coach of the year. I'm pretty sure I talked about it on this podcast. But I stand by the premise. The premise was I think the Vikings can win the division. And instead of betting the Vikings at plus 275 to win the division, who is going to get credit if they do win the division? It's not going to be Kirk Cousins because nobody likes Kirk Cousins. It's not going to be Dalvin Cook because he's a running back. It's not going to be Justin Jefferson because we couldn't even give that guy rookie of the year when he had a historically good rookie season last year. It would have been Mike Zimmer. Now the irony and what makes this such a terrible bet at 40-1, which if you bet anything at 40-1, you really have to go out of your way for it to be a bad bet. The thing that makes it a bad bet is the reason they are not winning the division is because Mike Zimmer is such a bad coach. Has made so many mistakes, and his staff and the team functionally has made so many mistakes in losing close games to the Lions, the Cardinals, the Bengals. Listen, we've already been down this road, right? Where you switch some of the losses into the win column. But the premise for all of it was that I thought the Vikings were going to sweep the Packers. And so, no, Mike Zimmer's not going to win coach of the year. He is, in fact, probably going to get fired at the end of the season, or at least he probably should. But maybe he doesn't, and maybe he doesn't because the Vikings end up doing the one sort of thing that I thought they were going to do, and that's sweep the Packers in head-to-head matchups. So, yeah, I'm back on my BS here. I've got the Vikings here. I don't think we're going to get 7. I would love 7. I don't think it's going to matter. I think they win this game outright. And at plus 240, that's an excellent value on the money line for a team that can literally take the recipe that the Browns did last year. And then instead of just dumping a bunch of rat poison into said recipe like Baker Mayfield did, we've got, instead of a Baker in this situation, wait for it, we've got a Cook that's going to be the key to this game. Yeah. Shake your head. You're shaking.
Just gonna let that one go, and I'm gonna move on. Just gonna move on.
Still shaking.
We mentioned the Packers. Obviously, the Packers should have lost last week to this team, but instead, Baker Mayfield was doing Baker Mayfield things. The Browns lose, but now they find themselves on Monday night, primetime Baker, 3.5-point road favorites against the Steelers, and I just can't with the Steelers. I've been saying this all season long. I just can't do it. But I mean, they're going against my guy Baker, which we know my relationship with Baker Mayfield this season, which I also can't do.
Right.
So this one's a tough one. And fundamentally, it's just the Steelers. Is this Big Ben's last hurrah?
It's super narrative-y.
Right?
It's super narrative-y,
right?
but I kind of think it is, man. I kind of think
3.5 points.
How are the Steelers getting 3.5 points here? Now, again, premise and the sort of concept, hey, everybody can win, everybody can cover, anybody could win by 7, 10 points, et cetera here. But of the quote unquote big name quarterbacks, right? We're not talking about the Jake Fromms of the world or the rookies or whatever. Ben Roethlisberger, we don't trust, but Baker Mayfield, we also do not trust, right? This isn't all that complicated. Neither of these guys, I'm not going to back either of these guys or these teams because of the quarterback. I'm certainly not going to back Baker Mayfield on the road, requiring him and that team to win by more than 3 points. Now, it's easy to look at the Steelers, watch them get blown out last week, and watch the Browns and be like, well, they're pretty competitive with the Packers, and look at the Steelers' run defense, getting gashed by Minnesota, getting gashed by everybody in sight, and be like, yeah, the Browns could go on the road here and win this game. But there's 3 elements here, and all of them are narrative-y. One's got at least some statistical backing behind it, and the statistical backing one is it's been 19 straight Monday Night Football home games where the Steelers have won the game outright. Like, that is crazy. Like, there is something to that. Now, I understand, this goes back to 1992, and like the Steelers have been at the very least good all of those years, but a lot of those years they were pretty much just as good as they are now, right? Which is to say, okay, like, meh, right? Like, we talk about them as one of these teams that might be like the pure, like, most even average team in the NFL, right? The 50 out of 100 without much of a, massive downswing to, what's the worst they're going to play? 45. And then what's the best they're going to play? 55. Like, they are of a really tight range around mediocre. And yeah, they lost to the Titans, or they beat the Titans, but like, they were, underdogs to the Titans for that game 2 weeks ago. They end up winning that game because the Titans turned the ball over 4 times. Baker Mayfield did that last week. Like, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Baker just turns the ball over 4 times as well. And so I'm going to rely on the defense here. I'm going to rely on some of just the general voodoo, if you will, of the Steelers, the Mike Tomlin home underdog. This is not just our last, chance here for Ben Roethlisberger. This is our last chance to try to make the playoffs here in a all messed up AFC North. Like, this is that backs against the wall thing, right? And I've heard a lot of people talk about the Browns being an interesting division bet because all they need to do is win this week and win next week, and then have Cincinnati lose to Kansas City, and they're all of a sudden going to win the division at plus 550. I don't even think it gets to that point. I think they lose to the Steelers this week. This is just what the Steelers do. You really think the Steelers in Ben Roethlisberger's last home game, with the crowd being what it's going to be, is just going to like allow the Browns, a team that they have beaten up on for 25 to 30 years, they're just going to walk in there and not just win, but win by more than 3.5 points. Like, I understand why the line exists, because I know like what goes into these lines and the ratings and that these sportsbooks have or whatever. But that just doesn't seem right. Like, this feels like one where if you're betting the Browns, you're sitting there going like, what did I do that for? Because I think the Steelers, crazily enough, like, maybe it's not that crazy, I think they play their best game of the season on Monday night.
I look forward to it. Indeed. And you know what I also look forward to? I look forward to watching the games along with my Twitter feed and finding out just, enjoying that communal viewing sense that we like to have with social media these days. And if the people want to join in on said conversation, enjoy bowl season, enjoy the semifinals, enjoy Sunday afternoon with a full slate of NFL games, where can the people find you online?
Yeah, I mean, listen, they should find me out on the street because I got to go for a walk, man. Like, I got to get some fresh air. I got to, I'm getting loose on the old Twitter feed as far as like calling stuff. I'm getting loose on the pod, right? I just called a referee a cheat earlier on in the podcast. Your boy needs some fresh air, maybe an extra Peloton ride. But while I'm out getting a walk in, follow me at MRussAuthentic on Twitter. That's where everything that I do. I'm exhausted. I'll be honest, this is a busy time for me. College football previews every single game, basically, or certainly all the important ones over at The Score. Everything gets retweeted through there. End of the year content, super fun. As long as the fun police aren't out in full effect, we tried to have a good time with that. And then college basketball stuff. We're making that turn. I'm watching the Oklahoma-Oregon Alamo Bowl, and like Oklahoma just pounding away on Oregon, I guess. And meanwhile, Tennessee and Alabama in college basketball are playing, and they're playing a great game. And the last minute is just they're exchanging 3-pointers and buckets, and it's coming down to the wire. And I felt like I was literally watching the change from college football season to college basketball season happening on my screens as I moved the football game to the second screen and the basketball game down to the main audio screen. I'm like, this is literally the changing of the guard. Now, of course, we've got a few games here, some relatively important ones too, but yeah, we're going to get into some college basketball here. Got some 3 pretty good games on Saturday. There were supposed to be more, as there always is. But we got West Virginia and Texas. My number for this game is Texas -7. I imagine that's going to be lower than the market. So West Virginia plus the points might end up being a play on Saturday. Baylor and Iowa State. You wake up and you find out that Iowa State is a top 10 team. What? I don't think that's going to be reflected in the point spread here because obviously rankings and ratings are a completely different animal. So I've got Baylor as -5 on the road here against Iowa State. That'll be interesting to see if Iowa State actually does have the goods to hang with a good veteran, well-coached team in Baylor who has a chance to go back to the Final Four this year. And then Villanova at Seton Hall. Seton Hall, another good team, another top 20 type of a team here. I got Villanova by about 1.5 points here on the road against Seton Hall. So if Seton Hall ends up being favored by any little amount here, I think Villanova would be an interesting play plus the points. And if it's the other way where Villanova is getting a little bit more credit because they are Villanova, then Seton Hall as a home underdog of, sort of more than a bucket might be worth the play there. So yeah, doing the transition thing, just taking down referees, taking down coaches, doing what we do. Hopefully everybody takes everything with, a little tongue in cheek, a little grain of salt, all of that sort of thing. But I just got to get through New Year's Day here and get a chance to catch my breath.
Sounds good, my dude. Appreciate it. And we'll catch up soon down the line.
Yeah, in 2022. Thanks, buddy.
Happy New Year. And if you want to follow me online, you could do so on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander and on Twitter at Shell Alexander. Like and subscribe to the DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And for more from this brand new project from DRF Sports, we just got to make sure, if you're not familiar with the letters DRF, Daily Racing Form has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now we're taking over the entire sports world. So if you want all the coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, MLB, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all the data on every game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, and more. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. If you want access to all of the raw data, go to drf.com/sports. That's where you get the usual game previews. And of course, we go in depth on this podcast. Basically, however you want your betting information, we've got you covered. That's all I got for now. But remember to tune into this DRF Sports Podcast every Tuesday and Friday. And hey, sometimes if you're lucky, we sprinkle in a little extra episode here and there. But until next time, that's all I got for now. See ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at DRF_sports.